Every 66 seconds, someone in the United States develops Alzheimer's disease, and a growing body of research out of major universities is pointing not at some rare exotic cause, but at 5 extremely ordinary foods sitting in most kitchens right now, foods that don't look dangerous on the label and don't taste dangerous in the moment. Neurologists studying brain aging keep landing on the same 5 categories, again and again, across different countries and different research teams. Stay with me to number 1, because it's the broadest, best studied category of the entire 5, and it's hiding inside most of the other 4 without most people realizing it. Here's exactly what you're getting from the next several minutes. 5 specific food categories, each one backed by a real published study with real numbers attached. Not a vague warning to eat healthier. By the end, you'll know precisely which foods the research is actually pointing at, what the proposed mechanism is in each case, and what a realistic, livable swap looks like. Not a demand to overhaul your entire kitchen overnight. A quick note before we go further. This channel is for general education, not medical advice. And I'm not a doctor or a neurologist. I'm reporting on published research from neurologists and university research teams, not offering a diagnosis or a prescription. Always talk with your own doctor before making any major changes to your diet, especially if you're managing diabetes, heart disease, or any existing condition. With that said, let's get into exactly what the research has found and why these 5 foods in particular keep showing up across study after study. Consider someone like Margaret, call her that, a composite of the kind of case this research is built on, not any single real patient. 68 years old, sharp as ever by her own account, but noticed over a couple of years that she was reaching for words more often mid-sentence, and her family had started gently mentioning it too. Her diet wasn't unusual or unhealthy by most standards. A soda most afternoons, deli turkey sandwiches a few times a week, the occasional fried fish basket on a Friday. Nothing dramatic, nothing she'd have flagged as a problem. When she started keeping a food diary at her doctor's suggestion, alongside a basic memory screening, what stood out wasn't any single meal. It was how many of her regular, ordinary choices fell into the same handful of categories researchers have been studying for over a decade. Margaret's screening, for what it's worth, came back reassuring. Ordinary age-related changes, nothing pointing toward a diagnosis. But the conversation with her doctor still shifted something for her. Rather than treating her diet as separate from her brain health, she started seeing the soda, the deli meat, and the fried Friday basket as 3 small, related habits, rather than 3 unrelated treats. She didn't eliminate any of them entirely. She simply stopped treating all 3 as automatic defaults, which, as it turns out, is exactly the kind of change the research behind this video is actually measuring. Before we get into the 5, tell me in the comments your age and how many of these you think you might already be eating regularly. I read these, and they shape exactly what I cover next. Here's what almost no one explains about why food and memory are connected this directly. Your brain, despite being only about 2% of your body weight, uses roughly 20% of the energy your entire body burns in a day, and it's remarkably sensitive to inflammation, blood sugar swings, and damaged blood vessels. 3 things that diet affects more directly than almost anything else in your daily life. Picture your brain's blood vessels as a vast network of tiny delivery roads, constantly bringing oxygen and glucose to your neurons. Certain foods consumed regularly over years gradually damage those roads or clog them with inflammation, the same way certain foods damage the larger blood vessels feeding your heart. The 5 foods on this list aren't poison in the dramatic sense. They're foods that, eaten as a daily habit rather than an occasional treat, quietly work against that delivery system year after year. Number 5 is sugary drinks, regular soda, sweetened iced tea, and fruit juice, even the kind labeled 100% juice. Researchers using data from the long-running Framingham Heart study examined brain scans and memory testing in roughly 4,000 adults and found that people who regularly drank more than 2 sugary beverages a day of any type showed measurably smaller overall brain volume, poor performance on memory testing, and a notably smaller hippocampus, the specific brain structure responsible for forming new memories. Think of the hippocampus as your brain's filing cabinet for new information. A smaller, shrinking filing cabinet means less space to store what you're trying to remember. It's worth being precise here. This particular study found an association with brain shrinkage and memory performance, not a proven link to dementia diagnosis itself. Sugar in the brain is a genuinely active, evolving area of research, and the honest summary is associated with, not causes. A separate study from the same research group did find that people who drank diet soda daily were nearly 3 times more likely to develop stroke or dementia over the following decade, a striking number that researchers themselves describe as hypothesis-generating rather than settled proof. Either way, the pattern across both regular and diet-sweetened drinks points the same direction. Daily sweetened beverages, sugared or artificially sweetened, are worth treating as the exception, not the daily habit. The practical swap here doesn't require eliminating flavor from your day entirely. Sparkling water with a splash of real fruit juice, unsweetened iced tea, or simply water with citrus slices can replace the daily habit, while still leaving room for an actual soda as the occasional treat. It was probably meant to be in the first place, rather than a daily default. Number 4 is processed and cured meats: bacon, sausage, hot dogs, deli ham, and salami. The foods most people don't think twice about because they've been breakfast and lunch staples their entire lives. A massive study following nearly 500,000 people in the UK Biobank found that every additional 25 grams of processed meat eaten per day, roughly 1 slice of bacon, was associated with a 44% higher risk of developing dementia overall, and a 52% higher risk specifically of Alzheimer's disease. A separate, more recent study presented by researchers tracking a similar population found that eating about 2 servings of processed meat a week, compared with less than 3 servings a month, raised dementia risk by roughly 14 to 16%. The mechanism researchers point to involves the nitrates and nitrites used to cure and preserve these meats, along with the saturated fat and sodium load, all of which are tied to inflammation and blood vessel damage over years of regular consumption. The encouraging side of this same research, swapping a daily serving of processed meat for fish was associated with a 28% lower dementia risk, and swapping it for nuts or legumes was associated with roughly a 19% lower risk, meaning this isn't a category that requires giving up protein, just being more selective about where it comes from. If any of these are sounding familiar so far, type the number that surprised you most in the comments below. Number 3 is fried food and anything high in artificial trans fat. Think donuts, fried chicken, packaged baked goods, and the non-dairy creamers and frozen pizzas that still carry trans fats, even when the label rounds down to 0 grams. A study published in the journal Neurology followed more than 1,600 older adults in Japan for roughly a decade, measuring actual trans fat levels in their blood, rather than relying on self-reported diet, and found that people with the highest blood trans fat levels were 52 to 74% more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease or dementia from any cause compared with those with the lowest levels, even after accounting for other major risk factors like blood pressure and diabetes. Trans fats are particularly disruptive because they get incorporated directly into your cell membranes, including the membranes of your brain cells, where they appear to interfere with normal cell signaling in a way naturally occurring fats don't. The good news on this one is regulatory. The FDA banned the deliberate addition of artificial trans fats to the food supply back in 2015, which means this category has gotten meaningfully smaller in recent years. But foods listing partially hydrogenated oil anywhere in the ingredients, or fried foods made with reused frying oil at restaurants, can still carry meaningful amounts. Checking the ingredient label for that specific phrase, rather than trusting the 0 grams trans fat claim on the front, is the single most useful habit for catching what's left of this category. Number 2 is refined white flour and the foods built from it: white bread, most crackers, pastries, and anything made primarily from flour that's had the fiber-rich bran and germs stripped away during processing, the same processing we've talked about on this channel before, in the context of blood sugar. A study from Mayo Clinic researchers published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease found that older adults eating diets heaviest in refined carbohydrates had an 89% higher risk of developing mild cognitive impairment or dementia compared with those eating the least, while those eating diets richest in healthy fats had a 44% lower risk. The proposed mechanism connects directly to something covered earlier on this channel. Refined carbohydrates cause rapid blood sugar spikes, and those repeated spikes, over years, are increasingly linked to insulin resistance inside the brain itself, sometimes referred to informally in research circles as type 3 diabetes, since insulin plays a direct role in how neurons communicate and repair themselves. This doesn't mean carbohydrates as a category are the enemy. Whole grains, beans, and vegetables didn't carry this same signal in the research. It's specifically the refined, stripped-down version, white bread, white rice in large amounts, pastries, that the data keeps flagging. The swap that keeps showing up across this research isn't no bread, it's whole grain bread. The fiber that survives less processing is exactly what slows the blood sugar spike this entire mechanism depends on. And number one, the category that ties the other four together and explains why so many people are eating several of these without realizing it, is ultra-processed food broadly. The entire category that includes packaged snacks, frozen meals, sodas, processed meats, and refined baked goods all at once. A landmark study published in JAMA Neurology followed roughly 11,000 adults in Brazil for over a decade and found that people who got more than 20% of their daily calories from ultra-processed foods, about 400 calories in a 2,000-calorie diet, easily reached with a fast food meal or two, showed a 28% faster rate of overall cognitive decline and a 25% faster decline specifically in executive function, the mental skills involved in planning, decision-making, and problem-solving. A separate, large analysis from Harvard researchers found that the highest consumers of ultra-processed food had a 58% higher risk of developing dementia compared with the lowest consumers, while people eating the most whole, minimally processed food showed a 41% lower dementia risk by comparison. It's worth being fair to the research here too. Not every study agrees. A Dutch study following older adults found no significant link between ultra-processed food intake and cognitive decline in their specific population, a reminder that this remains an active area of research rather than fully settled science. But the overall weight of evidence across multiple countries and research teams leans consistently in one direction. The more of your daily calories come from industrially processed formulations rather than whole or minimally processed food, the more your long-term brain health metrics tend to suffer. Now here's the line that matters most in this entire video. Eating any one of these 5 foods occasionally, a hot dog at a summer cookout, a soda at a movie, fried chicken on vacation, is not something to fear, and none of this research is suggesting that a single meal determines your future. What the research is actually describing is a pattern, daily default reliance on these categories, sustained over years, rather than the occasional exception. If you're noticing memory changes that feel different from ordinary forgetfulness, getting lost in familiar places, repeating the same questions within a short span, real difficulty following a conversation you'd have followed easily a year ago, that's worth a direct conversation with your doctor and a proper cognitive evaluation, regardless of your diet. Diet is one piece of a much larger picture that includes genetics, blood pressure, sleep, and physical activity. And no single food swap replaces an actual medical evaluation when something feels genuinely different. So here's why this list actually matters when you put the 5 pieces together. None of these 5 foods are exotic or rare, they're default choices, the convenient, affordable, widely available options most kitchens are built around. That's exactly what makes them worth naming directly rather than vaguely gesturing at eating healthier. The pattern across every single study here points to the same underlying idea. Foods that are heavily processed, high in added sugar, refined starch, or artificial trans fat, eaten as a daily habit rather than an occasional choice, appear to quietly work against the blood vessels and cells your brain depends on year after year, long before any symptom would ever show up on its own. And notice how the 4 specific categories, sugary drinks, processed meat, fried food, refined flour, are really just the most common doorways into that 5th, broader category of ultra-processed eating, address the one big pattern, and the other 4 tend to shrink along with it. Tonight, the plan is simple. You don't need to overhaul your entire kitchen in one weekend, and nobody watching this needs to feel like every meal from this point forward has to be perfect. Pick just one of these 5 that you eat the most often and find one realistic swap: sparkling water instead of soda some days, fish or beans instead of deli meat a couple of times a week, whole grain bread instead of white. Small, repeated changes in exactly these 5 categories are what the research has actually measured improvement against, not a complete diet overhaul, attempted all at once and abandoned within a month. Pick one. Start there. Add the next one once the first feels automatic. Before you go, be honest. Which of these 5 is hardest for you to imagine cutting back on? Tell me below. And if you want to know the specific foods the same research links to better memory and slower cognitive aging, the other side of this exact coin, that's exactly what we're covering in the next video. I'll see you there.